Good afternoon, all ladies and gentlemen. Before I start my presentation, I asked Professor Krishnan how much of time I had, and he said 12 to 15 minutes, and 10 to 12, okay. And I was mighty pleased he wasn't God. So I start my presentation based upon certain experiences that we have with respect to the work that we do and the interaction that we do with universities and with people who innovate, etc. And I just thought I will bottle them down into certain interesting videos and anecdotes rather than just having a lawyer, talk about what all happens. The first point, which is a very encouraging sign for you, is what the Economist magazine thinks of India. And I'll just show you a very short video.
Time is money. The top three economies throughout history. At the start of the Common Era, India was the world's largest economy, followed by China. The far-flung Roman Empire came a distant third. 1,000 years later, it looked almost the same, but third place shifted to Byzantium in modern-day Turkey. 500 years after that, Italy returned, rich from Renaissance trade. Over several centuries, other European powers vied for third. Initially France, then Britain. China and India swapped places. After the Industrial Revolution, the top three economies accounted for less than half of global output. In the 20th century, America dominated. China temporarily fell away. Russia made the top three, as did Japan. Britain dropped down. Now, the modern world resembles the distant past. China and India are back, along with a single Western economy, and America's preeminence is over.
So as you can see from this presentation, the magazine that is ranked as the #1 magazine in terms of economy, The Economist considers that India is making a strong return and which is likely to accelerate. Now let's look at the Global Innovation Index. As you can see from the data that is on your screen on the Global Innovation Index, India still has a ranking which is 66. Which is improved, of course, from 81. It's right at the bottom. But still a lot needs to be done. I mean, for a country of the size of India to be at 66 is not so desirable. So, my very dear friend Satya started this presentation yesterday, and I thought I must involve him in this. And he made a very pertinent point that 90% of India's GDP will come from students below the age of 25. And that's why the role of university becomes extremely important in the scope of whatever we are doing. But the universities have this interesting paradox, which is the fact that they don't have an innovation environment. And one of the reasons why we lose a lot of students to talent, we lose a lot of talent which is in students, and we don't innovate is either because we don't understand what is innovation, or we don't have the environment for it, or we don't end up protecting it even if it is created. Now, while this may sound as very theoretical coming from me, I want you to see examples of some of the most prominent people that were lost to the path of innovation in colleges. And I thought I'll borrow the wisdom of none else than Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. This is what Steve Jobs says.
I dropped out. I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer,
so the point that he makes is that, he left college and he went out because the environment in the college was not motivating enough and conducive to his interest. And this brings me to a very interesting point that I was pondering over. When we got admissions in colleges, we got admissions based upon the cutoff marks that we had. For example, Satya and I both went to SRCC, and we pursued what, based upon the cutoffs, whatever we did there. But the point was, did we have an environment to chase a passion that we had? Probably no. And, in Satya's case, for example, you see where the venture has led him from college environment. So what could have been done at the college level in order to inculcate innovation? It could have been the creation of a curriculum, which may have been beyond the usual norms of education. It could have even been a practical curriculum. It could have been the creation of a social setup And I will give you an example really of how social setup motivates people and causes innovation. It could have been the creation of incentives, and not every incentive has to be monetary. It could even be recognition. It could have been a better engagement with the faculty. And when we read books from the Harvard Business and from Stanford and Wharton and other places, we see how much of faculty engagement there is in projects and white papers, etc. It could have been a networking effect, and the power of alumni and how they network and they fund startups and they mentor people towards innovation. It could have been infrastructure, that is more like laboratories and government involvement, getting speakers on campus, etc. Or even collaboration, how several universities can collaborate together and innovate. Right now, we all are in our own silos of functioning, but how we can collaborate together. Now, just take an example of how networking in a particular college environment created such a fantastic product. Next screen, yeah. So you can see this clear example of an entrepreneur who has created a product while he was in college. Now, if you say the college environment has not really supported him, in one sense, the argument would not be correct, because he had a social environment to engage in that caused him to think of the need and therefore to innovate. Now, a point I wanted to make to you, which is very pertinent at a college level, university level, is that we are fixated in our mind that only something which is complex is worthy and what is simple is not worthy. So I just thought I will share a very easy example with you. The man's mission to the moon was in 1969, right? So man had reached moon in 1969, and it was, a huge amount of money was spent, and it was like one of the biggest progressions that had happened. But nobody ever thought of the plight of people who were carrying luggage every day at airports, at railway stations, in cars, etc., breaking their backs, because nobody felt that that simple innovation was worthy of anything else. So the invention of the wheel in relation to luggage happened as late as 1987. And perhaps one of the reasons why it was delayed so much was because there was no environment for innovation. Now, I have mathematically done a calculation, which you may disagree with, but I'm not raising capital, so it's all right, which is that 1.19 billion people travel a day all over the world. And 365 days multiplied by 19 years of innovation, multiplied by a cost of just $1 for having invented wheels that did not give people problems with their backs or with their shoulders or frozen shoulders or whatever. You can translate into what that innovation led to.